My name's Austin, I'm 28 now, and this whole ordeal kicked off about a year ago when I was still 27. My family is made up of my mom, Jennifer, who's 54, my dad, William, 56, and my younger sister, Deborah, who's 24. For most of my life, I honestly thought we were just your average, middle-of-the-road family. Back then, I had a decent job in a city about 6 hours away from where my parents lived. I was financially independent, had my own apartment, and made sure to come back home for the big stuff: holidays, birthdays, and family gatherings. Deborah and I weren't especially close once we became adults, mostly because we lived in different cities, but whenever we talked, it was always polite and friendly. When she was a teenager, she had her dramatic streak. If things didn't go her way, she'd blow up, making a scene over little stuff, but I chalked it up to her being young and emotional. Everything shifted after I lost my job. The company I worked for had been downsizing, and my position ended up on the chopping block. It hit me hard. I had a little savings to cushion the blow, but nowhere near enough to cover rent and bills for long in a pricey city without steady income. For about a month straight, I was sending out resumes, sitting through interviews, and hoping something would stick, but nothing came together where I was living. That's when I had to face a tough decision. I chose to move in with my sister. Deborah had her own 2-bedroom apartment in a town also about 6 hours from our parents'. As soon as she heard about me getting laid off, she called and told me I could crash in her spare room. She made it sound so easy, said I could stay as long as I needed, no problem at all. At the time, it felt like a lifesaver, like she was really stepping up for me. I agreed, figuring it would only be for a few months, just long enough to cut my expenses and keep searching for work. I told her straight up that I'd cover my share of groceries and utilities with my unemployment benefits. I also promised I'd take on all the cleaning, cooking, and housework since I wouldn't be paying her actual rent. But living with Deborah ended up being nothing like I pictured. The first couple of weeks were fine. I mostly stayed in my room cranking out job applications, sending emails, and prepping for phone screens. Around the apartment, I kept things spotless: dishes washed, laundry folded, dinner ready by the time she got home from her receptionist job at a doctor's office. But about 3 weeks in, the vibe started to shift. Deborah would come home every evening looking furious. She'd toss her bag onto the couch and launch into long rants about her coworkers being unbearable, her boss being unfair, or patients being rude. Her complaints got louder and sharper as the days went on. If I tried to check in and ask how her day was, or offered a kind word, she'd snap and tell me I didn't get it or to just leave her alone. One night really stands out. She stormed in, looking like she was seconds from exploding, and started screaming about how her manager had written her up for being late again. I asked gently if she was okay or if there was anything I could do, and she suddenly turned on me. She accused me of not caring, said I was probably thrilled to freeload without having to work. I pushed back, reminding her I was paying for food and utilities, handling every chore in the apartment, and actively hunting for a job. Then, in an instant, she broke down crying, saying she was just crushed by all the stress she was under. The next morning, she mumbled an apology, blaming it all on work stress. That cycle, big blow-ups followed by guilt or silence, started happening more and more. Her behavior became harder to predict. She started accusing me of ridiculous stuff. One time she insisted I was using her fancy shampoo even though I had my own bottle sitting in the shower. Another time she claimed I was misplacing her mail, even though I never touched the pile on her desk. Then came the car incident. She asked me to move her car for street cleaning, so I parked it down the block and came back inside. Later that day, she barged into my room and started yelling that I'd scratched her car. We went outside, and she pointed at this tiny, faded scuff mark on the bumper. It was old and clearly worn, like it had been there for years, but she kept insisting I caused it. She screamed at me for nearly an hour, calling me reckless and irresponsible, before storming into her room and slamming the door. The next morning, she acted completely fine, like nothing had even happened, cheerful as ever. It threw me off completely. When my parents called once a week to check in, I tried to keep things upbeat. I didn't want to dump all this drama on them or make it sound like I was ungrateful for Deborah letting me stay. So, I just tell them things were okay and that I was still job hunting. Meanwhile, Deborah was spending more time at their house and having these long, quiet phone calls with my mom from her bedroom. After some of Deborah's calls with my parents, I began noticing a shift. The next time I talked to them, their voices would feel colder, shorter, like they were holding something back. Whenever I asked if something was wrong, they'd brush me off with excuses, saying they were tired, stressed, or had too much on their minds. That uneasy thought kept creeping in: maybe Deborah was twisting things and feeding them stories about me. I was still fighting to land work. I lined up a couple of remote interviews online and even one in-person interview about an hour away, but none of them ended in an actual offer. Meanwhile, my bank account was draining fast. The tension inside Deborah's apartment only kept building. She began treating me less like a guest and more like her errand boy. It didn't matter what I was in the middle of. If I was polishing up a cover letter or researching a company before an interview, she'd barge in and demand I drop everything. It could be something as petty as driving her to a friend's house, picking up her dry cleaning, or running to the store because she was craving some specific snack. And if I dared to tell her I was busy with job stuff, she'd lose it completely, meltdown after meltdown. Then came the day everything really shifted. 2 months after I moved in, Deborah walked in during the middle of the day, sobbing uncontrollably. Through the tears, she told me her manager had fired her out of nowhere, claiming it was unfair and personal. The rest of the day was chaos. She stormed around the apartment, screaming, crying, pacing back and forth like an animal in a cage. At one point, she even started slamming her fists against her own temples, shouting that her life was over and she didn't know what to do. I tried to calm her down, gently suggesting that maybe this could be a chance to start fresh, that losing a job didn't have to be the end of the world. But instead of listening, she spun on me, spitting venom. She accused me of being glad she'd been fired, sneering, "Guess you're not the only loser in this apartment now, huh?" The very next morning, I overheard her on the phone with Mom, crying so loudly you'd think she'd lost everything, telling her how unfair it all was. Now both of us were home, unemployed, day in and day out. The air inside that apartment felt suffocating, like it was building pressure by the hour. Her moods swung wildly. One minute she'd act cheerful, inviting me to watch a movie, and the next she'd ignore me completely or snap at me for something ridiculous, like the way I breathed. On top of that, she completely abandoned any responsibility around the place. Dirty dishes stacked in the sink, clothes left scattered on the bathroom floor, food wrappers tossed wherever she sat. If I didn't clean it, it just sat there. And anytime I asked, politely, for her to pitch in, even just rinse a plate, she'd twist it into an attack, accusing me of trying to control her. Then she started saying bizarre things, like I was jealous of her or plotting to ruin her life. If I asked her what she meant, she'd either glare at me blankly or walk straight out of the room like I hadn't spoken. By that point, I was applying to anything I could find, jobs I wouldn't have considered before, in any location. The idea of staying under the same roof with her much longer was unbearable. I kept to my room with the door shut, just trying to disappear. But then, Mom's 55th birthday was coming up. By then I'd been living with Deborah for around 3.5 months, and things were worse than ever. Still, no matter how bad things were, I wanted to do something nice for Mom. The problem was my finances were a disaster. I had barely enough money for gas and maybe a small gift. I'd been stretching every dollar, living off instant noodles and plain rice most days just to save. Still, I hatched a plan. I'd drive the 6 hours to surprise her on her birthday, hand her a little gift, and then turn around and drive the 6 hours back the same day. 12 hours of driving, but I thought the gesture would show her how much she meant to me. I kept it to myself. Telling Deborah would have been a disaster. She'd either try to stop me, force herself along and ruin the trip, or worse, call our parents and spoil the surprise. The night before Mom's birthday, Deborah casually mentioned she was staying over at a friend's house and wouldn't be back until late the following day. That sealed it. I could leave early without her even noticing. I used almost the last of my cash to fill the tank. After that, I had maybe $40 left to my name. At 4 a.m. on Mom's birthday, I got up, threw on clothes, scribbled a short note for Deborah, just that I'd be out for the day, and left it on the counter. I didn't say where I was going. Then I hit the road. The streets were empty, and for hours it was just me, the car, and the radio. I pictured Mom's face when she opened the door and saw me there. By the time I pulled into my hometown around 10 a.m., I was equal parts nervous and excited. I drove straight to my parents' house. I parked in the driveway, walked up the front path, and knocked, even though my old key was still on my keychain. It felt more respectful to knock. Dad opened the door, and the look on his face made my stomach drop. It wasn't happiness, it was shock, maybe even irritation. The first thing he said was, "Austin, what on earth are you doing here?" I forced a smile and held up the small wrapped gift. "Hey, Dad. I came to surprise Mom for her birthday." But instead of letting me in, he stepped outside halfway and pulled the door behind him, blocking the entrance. He said, "Austin, this isn't a good time. You really shouldn't have come today." I was stunned. What was he talking about? Was Mom okay? He insisted she was fine, but repeated that this wasn't the day to visit, that they had plans. I pressed him for an answer, and that's when I heard it, voices from inside the house. I recognized Mom's voice right away, and then, to my shock, Deborah's voice. My sister, who was supposedly at her friend's house, was right there inside my parents' place 6 hours away. Then Mom came to the door. She opened it wider, and the moment her eyes landed on me, her face fell. She didn't look happy. She didn't even look surprised. She looked drained, sad, almost scared. In a soft voice, she asked, "Austin, honey, what are you doing here?" I repeated myself, "I came for her birthday, to surprise her." She glanced at Dad, then back at me, and said, "I appreciate it, I really do. But your father's right. Today isn't a good day. We have plans, and, well, it's better this way." I stood there on the porch holding that little gift, feeling like an idiot. I asked if I could at least come in for a minute, wish her happy birthday, and hand her the present. And that's when Deborah appeared right behind Mom, standing there smirking at me. Then Mom delivered the final blow. "Austin, please. I just want a peaceful birthday. And honestly, I didn't want you here today." Those words hit harder than anything. I didn't want you here today. It felt like my chest caved in. Before I could even process it, Dad's voice cut in, sharp and cold, "Leave now, Austin. Get in your car and go." I searched Mom's eyes for some sign this wasn't real, some indication she didn't mean it. But she just stood there, tired and unshaken. And something inside me just shut down. I didn't yell, didn't argue, I just said, "Okay." I turned, walked back to my car, and drove off. The gift sat untouched on the seat next to me. For the first hour, I drove in silence, numb. When I finally saw a rest stop sign, I pulled over, stepped out, grabbed the gift, and dropped it into a trash bin by the picnic tables. Then I got back in the car and drove the full 6 hours back to Deborah's empty apartment. By the time I got back, the place was dark. I didn't even bother turning on the lights. When I got back to Deborah's place that night, I didn't sit down or think it through. I went straight to my room, dragged out an old duffel bag, and started tossing in whatever I could: clothes, my laptop, anything important. I didn't have a plan. I barely had $20 left, and staying there wasn't an option anymore. After pacing for a moment, I remembered an old friend who still lived in the city I'd left. On instinct, I called him. I didn't explain the whole mess, I just said I was in a bad spot and needed somewhere to crash for a few days. Without hesitation, he told me to come. No questions, no judgment. Before I left, I set Deborah's key on the kitchen counter. I scribbled a short note on a sticky pad, *, I'm gone. Don't contact me. *. That was the last thing I left behind. Then I opened my phone, transferred the last $100 from my account into hers, typed for electricity in the memo, and closed the app. I slung the duffel bag over my shoulder, walked out the door, and drove all night until I reached my friend's place back in my old city. The following days blurred together. My friend gave me his couch, fed me, and maybe most importantly, didn't push me to talk. He just let me exist. Still, I knew I couldn't freeload forever. I had to figure something out. So I made a hard call. I sold my car. It was a few years old but in solid shape, so I got a couple thousand for it. That money bought me two things: a deposit on a small single room in a rundown shared house, and enough left over for a few bags of groceries. 2 weeks later, after throwing my resume at anything that paid, I finally landed a job. Not a dream job, not even a decent one. It was night shifts at a huge warehouse, loading and unloading trucks. The pay was lousy, the work crushed my back, but it was income. And income meant survival. In the days right after Mom's birthday, my phone lit up a few times, calls, texts from my parents and Deborah. I didn't answer. I didn't text back. After a week of silence on my end, the call stopped. That's when I blocked their numbers for good. I unfollowed and blocked all of them on social media too. That was it, I was done. Because here's the thing, once your own mother tells you she doesn't want you at her birthday, after you've driven 12 hours just to see her, there's no mistaking where you stand. And with my dad ordering me off the porch, and Deborah standing there smirking, the message couldn't have been clearer. They didn't want me around. So I gave them exactly what they wanted. Life after that was stripped down to the basics. I saved every dollar I could. I worked nights until dawn, came home smelling like sweat and dust, collapsed into bed, and repeated the cycle. Meals were cheap: eggs, pasta, bread. I didn't go out. I didn't talk to anyone. Even when my friend reached out to check on me, I usually brushed him off with a quick busy or tired. I isolated myself. And the result? I was completely, utterly alone. But in a strange way, there was relief in that. No family drama. No walking on eggshells. Just me and the silence. It was bleak, but it was peace. That went on for 8 months. 8 months of working, eating, and sleeping. Eventually, after about half a year, I managed to snag something slightly better: a daytime job doing data entry for a small logistics company. Still low paying, but easier on my body than the warehouse grind. I was still living in that same tiny room in the shared house. The walls were thin, the neighborhood was sketchy, but it was the best I could afford. By then, I'd managed to scrape together a small cushion of savings again, just a few thousand. Through all of that, I never spoke to my parents or Deborah. I told myself they'd moved on with their lives, just like I was trying to move on with mine. But in the back of my head, I never really understood it, the way they turned me away that day. The coldness. The rejection. I couldn't explain it, so I just learned to live with it. Then, 2 weeks ago, something shifted. I got a message on social media. It was from my aunt, my mom's sister. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, but I hadn't blocked her either. Her message was short. She said mom wasn't doing well, that she seemed deeply unhappy, that the whole family was under stress. She didn't go into details, just urged me to call my mom. I read it, and let it sit there. For days, I ignored it. I felt nothing, no urge to reach out. Why would I? They made their choice. A few days later, an email landed in my inbox. I recognized the sender instantly, my dad. The subject line read, * your mother misses you. *. I opened it, even though I knew I shouldn't. Inside, he said mom wasn't doing well, that she missed me more than anything. Then came the line that stuck with me, * things were complicated back then, and maybe we all misunderstood the situation. *. He asked if I'd be willing to talk. That phrasing * misunderstood the situation * made my blood boil. How do you misunderstand your father telling you to leave his house? How do you misunderstand your mother saying she didn't want you at her birthday? That wasn't confusion. That was deliberate. I haven't replied. I honestly don't know if I ever will. What could they possibly say that would make any of this okay? So I'm stuck asking myself, and maybe asking you too, would I really be wrong if I just kept ignoring them forever? Considering what they did to mom, flat out saying she didn't want me there, dad basically ordering me off the porch, I keep asking myself, what's the point of reopening that door? Update 1. First, I've got to thank everyone who read through my long post and actually took the time to respond. I never expected so many people to weigh in. A lot of you asked if there were other big blow-ups with Deborah that I'd left out, or if I'd ever been completely honest with my parents about how bad things were living with her. The truth? No. I never sat them down and spelled it all out. I never told them about her smashing a vase in anger or constantly accusing me of ridiculous things. When they called, I'd downplay it. I'd say living with Deborah was a little stressful, or that we had different habits. But I didn't go into detail. I didn't want to sound like I was whining, and I didn't want to start a war between them and Deborah. Part of me figured they already knew what she was like. Even as a teenager, she was dramatic, she'd throw fits to get attention or force her way. But what I saw when I lived with her as an adult was on a whole other level. It was like she'd turned into a completely different person. Another thing many of you brought up was whether Deborah might have been trash-talking me to our parents the whole time. Looking back now, I think that's exactly what was happening. Their voices started sounding colder during calls right around the time Deborah began visiting them every couple of weeks. She'd also have these long, hushed phone calls with mom behind her closed door. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the tone, her sounding upset, crying, like she was the victim of something. At the time, I thought she was venting about her job. It never crossed my mind that she might have been painting me as the problem, systematically turning them against me. Another common question was about money. Here's the truth, when I was on unemployment, I gave Deborah between $200 and $250 cash every month to cover utilities. That was a huge slice of my benefits. I bought all my own groceries, paid my phone bill, and covered every car expense myself. For the first couple months, I even cooked dinner for both of us almost every night. But then she started complaining, said my food was bland or not what she wanted. So I stopped cooking for her and just made meals for myself. I still did the grocery shopping, though. She'd give me lists of what she wanted, and sometimes she'd hand me money for it, but usually it wasn't enough. I'd cover the difference out of my own pocket. And of course, I handled all the cleaning in the shared spaces, often cleaning up her messes too. I bent over backward trying not to be a burden. Several of you pointed out that my parents' reaction on mom's birthday didn't add up. That even if they were busy or annoyed, the level of coldness didn't make sense. And I agree. The way they treated me that day, the complete rejection, felt like it came from something much deeper than being irritated by a surprise visit. Reading your comments forced me to really think about it. And the idea that Deborah had been deliberately poisoning them against me for months, it started to feel like the only thing that explained their behavior. Otherwise, why would they shut me out so completely? My dad's email kept replaying in my head too, the part where he wrote that things were misunderstood. Even though I was still furious and hurt, there was this small part of me, the part that remembered our family before everything went so sour, that wanted to know what he meant. Not because I wanted to forgive them. Not because I wanted things to go back to normal. I just wanted answers. Calling them was off the table. There was no way I was going to risk another round of excuses, gaslighting, or being yelled at. But then I saw a comment suggesting that if my dad was vague in his email, I could write back with a short, emotionless message. Something direct. No drama. Just asking him to explain exactly what he meant. That idea stuck with me. So, about a week after his email, I sat down and wrote my reply. I rewrote it over and over until it was stripped of every bit of emotion. The final version simply said, "Dad, your email wasn't clear. Before I even think about talking, I need you to explain in plain words what you meant by misunderstood the situation on Mom's birthday. I also need a direct explanation for why I was told to leave and why Mom told me she didn't want me there. If you can't give that, then there's nothing to discuss." I left out how hurt I was. I left out the anger. I kept it purely factual. Then I hit send. Honestly, I expected nothing. Either silence or some defensive rant. But 2 days later, his reply came through. And it wasn't defensive at all. For the first time, it felt like he was actually laying out the truth. He said that on the morning of Mom's birthday, just before I arrived, Deborah had completely broken down in front of them. He admitted that for weeks, even months, she had been feeding them a list of horrible things about me. According to my dad, Deborah had been telling them all kinds of lies about me the entire time I lived with her. She claimed I was stealing money, sometimes from her purse, sometimes directly from her bank account. She told them I'd been trying to sabotage her job, even going so far as to say I called her clinic anonymously to spread rumors about her to her boss. Then Dad said Deborah showed them bruises on her arms. At the time, she told them those bruises came from me. She claimed I'd gotten violent during arguments, shoving her, shaking her, even pushing her down once. In the email, Dad admitted that, looking back, the bruises seemed suspicious, like they were injuries she could have easily caused herself. Given how erratic she was during that time, he thought it was entirely possible she hurt herself to make her story sound more believable. But at the time, they believed her completely. Deborah had told them I was constantly belittling her, calling her names, making her life miserable in her own home to the point where she felt unsafe. She painted this picture of me as some bitter, angry guy who lost his job and was taking it all out on her. Dad explained that she hadn't dumped all of this on them at once. She fed it to them slowly, piece by piece, for months. So on Mom's birthday morning, when Deborah had her full-on meltdown, sobbing, screaming that she couldn't live with me anymore, they were already primed to believe every word. According to Dad, she told them my surprise visit was just another one of my schemes to create drama and ruin Mom's day. She even threatened to pack her bags and leave right then if they allowed me to stay. Dad said he and Mom felt trapped and overwhelmed. They believed they had to choose between letting me in or protecting Deborah's safety. He admitted that Mom was horrified, completely crushed, by the idea that I might have been stealing and even physically abusive. So when I showed up at the door all smiles, holding a gift, they reacted based on all the poison Deborah had been planting in their heads. In the email, Dad admitted they should have questioned her more carefully. They should have spoken to me directly instead of swallowing every story she told. But they didn't. He said after I cut them off, Deborah ended up moving back in with them because she couldn't afford rent anymore. And once she was living under their roof again, her mask started to slip. She had screaming fits, threw tantrums, and even trashed her own bedroom one night because they asked her to do chores. She started taking money straight from their wallets and Mom's purse. If they confronted her, she'd either deny it or blow up. The real breaking point came just a few weeks before Dad's email. Mom was cleaning out a closet and found a box of Deborah's old bank statements from when I lived with her. Those statements showed Deborah had been blowing money left and right on online shopping, makeup, clothes, and expensive takeout, the exact same period she'd been telling them I was stealing from her and leaving her broke. That, combined with her increasingly hostile behavior toward them, finally forced them to face the truth. Deborah had lied. Probably about everything. Dad closed his email by saying he wasn't looking for excuses. He just wanted me to understand the context, the pressure they'd been under, and the lies they'd been fed. He said he knew I had every right to be furious, but begged me, humbly this time, to consider talking to Mom. He said she was filled with regret, that she cried for me often, and missed me terribly. I must have read that email 10 times. It was overwhelming. To realize that my own sister had deliberately tried to destroy my relationship with my parents, it was beyond words. The things she accused me of, stealing, sabotaging her career, physical abuse, none of it was even remotely true. She built an entire narrative where I was some violent, bitter monster. And my parents believed it. The bruises? I still don't know where they came from. But I know this, I never touched her. The thought that she might have hurt herself just to sell her lies, it chilled me. But then I remembered her pounding her own head the day she got fired, and smashing that vase in anger, and I realized, yeah, she was capable of it. I haven't replied to Dad's second email. Knowing the truth changed the picture, but it didn't erase the damage. At the end of the day, my parents chose to believe I was a thief and an abuser without ever giving me a chance to defend myself. And they only realized the truth when Deborah turned on them, too. Update 2. It's been over a year since my original post and about 10 months since I shared my dad's email. After reading it, I took a long time to think. It explained their actions that day, sure, but it didn't excuse them. The fact remains, they believed the worst of me without ever asking for my side. I didn't reply to Dad for weeks. During that time, he sent one short follow-up, just saying he hoped I'd reconsider talking. Then Mom emailed me for the first time since before the birthday incident. Her email was full of remorse. She said she was sorry she believed Deborah, sorry she'd been a terrible mother, sorry she hadn't trusted me. She said she missed me desperately. She mentioned Deborah was getting some help after another big incident at their house, but didn't explain what kind of help or what had happened. Even with their apologies, I wasn't ready to reconcile. Eventually, I wrote one final email addressed to both of them. I told them I understood they'd been manipulated, but that didn't erase the fact that they never questioned Deborah or gave me the benefit of the doubt. They believed I was capable of theft and violence against my own sister, and that wasn't something I could just overlook. I told them I needed time. Maybe a long time. Maybe forever. And until then, I didn't want contact. If I ever changed my mind, I'd reach out myself. I explained that their choice had shattered my trust, and that trust wasn't coming back quickly, if ever. They respected that. It's been about 9 months since then, and I haven't heard from them again. The only exception was a Christmas card from my aunt. Inside was a short note, *, your mom talks about you a lot. She's still struggling. *. I didn't respond. So as of now, my relationship with my parents is gone. The collapse that started on my mom's birthday has become permanent, and I'm the one maintaining that distance now. Learning the truth about Deborah didn't bring me running back. It only confirmed that the whole situation was more toxic than I ever imagined. I don't plan to post again. I shared my storied event to figure out if I was wrong for cutting contact, and the responses I got and eventually my dad's confession helped me feel confident in my decision. My life is quieter these days. The hurt hasn't disappeared, but it isn't the raw wound it once was. I'm focused on moving forward, building something new for myself. To everyone who offered support or shared similar experiences, thank you. It helped to know I wasn't alone in dealing with a family falling apart. This is the last update I'll make on this.